It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you've got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Free Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew. I am the voice of the revolution, and we are live on Revolution Radio. This is freedomslips.com. We are live every Wednesday night for 2 hours right here on the Revolution Radio Network. And this is where the past meets the future. In here, the results are always positive. We might go a little past your imagination, but have no fear. You will be safely traveling with us. We're slowly building this presence here on this network. We're live actually 4 times a week here on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. And we are on YouTube Live simulcasting at the same time. So if you want to go to youtubelive.com or youtube.com and put in my name, Brooks Agnew, you'll get to the YouTube Live. If you're not getting the notifications, I can see why, because I checked my analytics today and only about 14% of my followers have their notifications turned on. So if you're listening tonight or you're listening as an archive later on in the week, as I posted on my many social media accounts, make sure to turn your notifications on, and then you'll know next time we go live. You'll be able to jump right in there. Chat room is beginning to fill up now. Let's go ahead and get started. I have a Drone Wars update. You know, it's kind of important the way that we have chosen to race against one another in the military world, in the military industrial complex. About, 10 years ago, we began building electric pickup trucks. And in doing so, of course, we went around and met with several other companies with whom we were colleagues at the time. And one was a company called Tesla Motors. And the founders of Tesla Motors had converted a Lotus Sportster, the two-door sports car, into an electric vehicle. A little, powerful, certainly a top performer up there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And one of the things that helped them along was a grant from DARPA. You know what DARPA is, right? And the grant was not to build an electric vehicle. The grant was to build an autonomous vehicle. Yes, and the team of my friends there at Tesla Motors actually won the competition. And they spent less than $100,000, and they built an autonomous vehicle that just waxed everybody and went right through the city course that they had, adjusted for various things that they put it in the way and moving objects, and it made it all the way through, no problem. Now, of course, we're seeing a lot of grants as Tesla Motors had one of their major shareholders, his name is Elon Musk, do a hostile takeover, and consequently went after every grant he could get, and I don't blame him. Every electric vehicle company was doing that at the time. Even we tried to get them. But most of the grants were not to build the electric vehicle. They were built to build autonomous vehicles. And I always thought, wow, that's so strange. I mean, how many of you would get in a vehicle and let the vehicle do all the driving? I mean, you know how crazy the other drivers are in all kinds of different vehicles, silver trucks and black trucks, and you don't know if the vision system is going to be able to see all those vehicles under all conditions. And obviously there have been some fatal mishaps, but now we kind of know why all that autonomous driving was going on. And who was doing it all? Well, we were doing it all. DARPA was doing it all. The United States was doing it all. However, the application for that autonomous driving was not to get you to and from work so that you could text safely or take a nap or whatever. It was for military purposes. They used car companies. They used the innovation of programmers like myself and others out there to build vehicles who could think for themselves on an artificial intelligent basis. That is to say, they could think on the fly and adjust to different things. I mean, any vehicle can follow a map, but to be able to follow a map and make adjustments for traffic, for obstacles, for pedestrians, for weather, all of those kinds of things, that takes an intelligent operating system. As it turns out, just a few days ago, the Russian Defense Ministry, this is Zvezda, it's a TV channel, and then they revealed the military autonomous robotic complex, Kungas. Now, Kungas, which is recently undergoing some tests in the 12th Central Research Institute of the Russian Defense Ministry. Now, this institute was actually set up in the early 1950s, way in the middle of the last century. Yes, they had electricity then. Come on, guys. But they were testing military equipment resistance to various damaging factors, including, believe it or not, arising from nuclear explosion. That's how far back this institute goes. Now, the experimental base allows for the simulation of a super powerful shock wave and strong electromagnetic fields, but it also has all kinds of obstacle courses and test tracks and everything that go with it. So the Kungas includes 5 unmanned ground vehicles, a man-portable robot, a light robot, a transportable robot, a Narekta combat robot, and a robot version of a shell-type armored personnel carrier. I'll give you a little bit of detail here, how devastating these autonomous robots are. Now, I know a little bit about autonomous robots. I'm not talking about a robot like you see on YouTube that has, a bunch of wires coming out of it and it's, running around a little inside building test track. I'm talking about something that's got batteries and it can go for a period of time, usually a couple of hours without, under full load without having to recharge. The Russian military did not provide extensive details on the project. However, data from open sources and released video allows us to get a general look at the Kungas complex of robots. Now, I'm going to describe these to you. I think you're going to be pretty amazed. The main thing to realize here is we probably have all this technology. We don't talk about it very much. The thinking programs that allow it to adapt to its environment and to conditions that are changing in that environment is ours. And yet, I'm about to describe to you weapon systems that the Russians have. And you have to wonder to yourself, how in the world did the Russians get their hands on DARPA information? Well, we may be able to answer that as soon as I get done with this. The first one is a man-portable reconnaissance vehicle with a manipulator. It only weighs about 30 pounds. But this is something a troop can carry into the field, set it down, and it can either fly or drive in the area, and it can do all of the peeping over the top of the hills and around the sides of the buildings and going door to door. If it gets shot, it's no big deal. But what it's doing is going and looking ahead and see what the troops are going to face before they get there. Sort of like an up-close personal multi-sensor kind of scope that the combat unit can use. The second is a light UGV. Now, it can carry an engineering manipulator or a combat module. That means it can open doors, or it can move a vehicle out of the way, or it can move a tree out of the middle of the road, check for mines, those kinds of things, or it can do the shooting. The combat module may include one of the following. This is how convertible this stuff is. By the way, I have a lot of friends that know a little bit about Russian technology, and I can tell you right now that the best stuff is built in Russia. How about an anti-tank missile package of up to 4 missiles? A PKTM 7.62 millimeter machine gun. That's about a 30 caliber machine gun. A grenade launcher. How about a flamethrower system? Yeah, all of this, and it weighs about 500 pounds. That's, about the weight of, a good-sized motorcycle. And they're probably pretty quick, too. The second is a transportable fire support and reconnaissance combat UGV. The combat module includes a 300-round Cord 12.7 millimeter heavy machine gun and a 90-round AG-30 automatic grenade launcher, and it weighs about 5,000 pounds. There are various configurations of this AGV. That's a pretty heavy piece of equipment, not something you're going to take out with a rifle. And if depending on how quick it is, it might be pretty hard to hit with something like a shoulder-fired grenade. The third is a combat robot. It's called the Narekhta. Now, the combat module in various options is equipped with a 30-round, of course, the 300-round machine gun, the Kalashnikov tank machine gun. Additionally, the module can be equipped with the 90-round automatic grenade launcher. In addition to these weapons, the combat robot can carry up to 500 kilograms. That's about 1,000 pounds, about 1,200 pounds of ammunition and equipment. The Narekhta comes in various configurations, including reconnaissance, medical, transport, electronic warfare, and other variants. So you can be jamming radios, moving wounded out of the way, moving materials and supplies, and towing maybe a trailer of supplies to resupply forward troops, and all of this remotely. And the next one is a robotic version of the BTR MDM shell armored personnel carrier. Now, there are various configurations. The robot is armed with, of course, the 30 caliber machine gun, the 7.62 millimeter machine gun, the anti-tank gun, the 300-round grenade launcher. The main purpose is that of transport module to get troops into forward positions without getting shot by small arms fire. And this robot weighs about 17 tons, about 34,000 pounds. All of these combat robots can be controlled remotely from a single command post. Now, here's the smart thing. This means that they are controlled by a unified control system with a single intelligent network I mean, can you say Skynet? Right? In this case, the concept is that any command robot or group of command robots can be controlled remotely from a single control center. The composition and number of controlled robots can differ depending on the situation and the task. Obviously, none of these robots are susceptible to gas. They're not susceptible to fire. They're not susceptible to smoke or darkness or germ warfare of any kind. They can carry on the warfare no matter what. The Kungas robotic system is a breakthrough development for the Russian armed forces. From the data revealed, it becomes clear that a platoon of combat robots has already been created within the ground forces. The unit is shaped in a manner which allows it to perform tasks on its own or interactively with other units. So if units get knocked out, it can adapt and change its tactics on the fly without panicking. This will give you an idea what the total capability is here. The robots of the Kungas system can provide fire, reconnaissance, and other types of support to more expensive systems, such as the Uran-9 tracked unmanned combat ground vehicle. By the way, it was tested in Syria last year, and it entered service in January of 2019. The Uran-9 is designed to deliver combined combat, reconnaissance, and counterterrorism units with remote reconnaissance and fire support. It weighs 10 tons, and it is armed with 30 millimeter Shipunov 2A72 automatic cannon. That's the same round that is fired by the Warthog. That's a 30 millimeter cannon mounted to an airplane. You can see how devastating those things are to tanks. And that's with a slow moving Warthog. You get one of these machines into position and it can fire 30 millimeter rounds. They're metal piercing, they're anti-personnel, they're exploding. It also has 4 ready to launch 9 M121 Ataka anti-tank guided missiles. So one of these things can take out 4 tanks. 6 ready to launch Shmea M reactive flamethrowers. That means it can fire in several different directions all kinds of anti-personnel flame weapons. Of course, it has a 30 caliber Kalashnikov coaxial machine gun. Additionally, it can carry 4 Igla surface-to-air missiles, so it can take out airplanes or helicopters. The combat robot is operated by a single service member and can be remotely controlled up to a maximum distance of 3,000 meters. That's about 2 miles. The road speed of the Uran-9 is about 35 kilometers an hour, and the cross-country speed is about 25 kilometers an hour. The Uran-9 is equipped with a laser warning and target detection system, so if it's painted, it has that, as well as an identification and tracking equipment. The fitted day and night vision allows for detection of targets at a maximum distance of 6 kilometers during the day and 3 kilometers at night. So there's no sneaking up on this thing. So the Russian military is aiming to gain capabilities allowing it to form offensive or defensive orders consisting of various robotic systems. Now, the one thing that you notice about this so far, we're just talking about ground support, right? So if Russian troops are going to move in on something or they're going to retreat to something, they've got robots to cover them on those sides. But the additional support will be provided by unmanned aerial vehicles and conventional units. That means that regular helicopters and stealth flying machines can fly together in the same battlefield. The Russian Su-57 fighter jet and the Okhotnik stealth heavy unmanned combat aerial vehicle were developed in a manner to maximize their level of interaction by allowing them to operate as a team in the event of conflict. You remember the movie Stealth? In the movie Stealth, you saw, well, of course, Jamie Farr, and they were all flying regular jets, and then the stealth robotic jet flew with them, and they sort of acted as a unit. The goal of this effort is to create a flexible and effective mix of robot and non-robot platforms capable of performing various tasks on the battlefield. Now, the one thing you have to remember here is we're not talking about extended, battles like you saw in Terminator. It's not something where, robots, drive for days and days and days and wipe out humans. That's not what happens. These things have to be very, very closely monitored, and they're expensive. If they get disabled in the field, they almost always have to destroy the unit instead of recover it. You know how hard it is to go out and recover a 10-ton unit that has a broken track? Not easy to do at all. There's no tow truck that's going to go out there and grab your robot and bring it back. It's destroyed. So, setting mines and blowing these things up and disabling them for humans, I don't think is that difficult to do. I wouldn't be afraid to face them in an open field. And the other thing to remember is that all you need really is a peanut butter sandwich, and you can go all day. These things, they have to be recharged, which means they have to have charging stations, which means they have to have electricity in the battlefield. Not very likely, right? Just not very likely. These things are great on a test field. They're great in a video game, but they're not really good in real battle because they run out of extension cord, I'll put it that way. So I'm not really worried about these that much. They're saying in the chat room that there was no notification, and they had their notification turned on. I don't really know what to say about that. YouTube does some crazy stuff, and they just changed their platform yesterday, or I think maybe it was Sunday. And the whole thing has changed. It's not that hard to do, but I can tell there are a lot of changes here. Now, YouTube swears up and down that they don't switch off notifications, but evidently people in the chat room are saying that they did not get notified and they had their notifications turned on. So don't know what to tell you about that. But please go tell your friends about it because we're on right now, and that's the important thing. What we want to be is on and live and have everything going. All right, I'm going to switch this over here. So I want to talk a little bit about, because all this kind of fits together tonight here at the freedomslips.com. We are on the Revolution Radio Network, and this is America Free Radio. We're in the America Free Radio studios right now, somewhere east of the Appalachians. Democrats are not really at the end of their rope, but I'd say they're kind of exasperated. Obviously, they've been trying to impeach 63 million Americans for about 3 years, maybe a little longer. And 63 million Americans are a little fed up with it, but we're not really doing anything violent. But 59% of U.S. likely voters are concerned that people who oppose President Donald Trump's policies, this would be the left, this would be, I was going to say Democrats, but I don't even think they're Democrats anymore. I think they're socialists. I think they belong to this global syndicate. They've lost their minds. They're not thinking. They're not at all like Democrats when I was young. They're not at all like Democrats were even 10 years ago. There's something odd about them. Don't you see that too? When you see them questioned at various events that they're at, they're deranged. They're like zombies. There's something really crazy about them. But 59% of U.S. likely voters are worried that these wackos are going to resort to violence. And this is actually in a Rasmussen poll. 1 in 3, that's 34%, 1 in 3 are very concerned that never-Trumpers will resort to violence to get their way. Now, we don't do that. I mean, what we do is say, well, we'll see at the polls. We don't do that. We go to work. We raise our families. We don't go out and beat people up and burn cars and break windows, and we don't call people names. It's kind of a weird situation that's going on out there, and it's got everybody concerned. Let's see, 1 in 4 is reporting that they're somewhat concerned that the never-Trumpers will become violent. Now, ironically, Democrats express the greatest fear. Isn't that weird? That they're the ones that are going to be violent, and yet they're the ones that are expressing the fear. Why do you think that is? We're going to talk about that pretty much the whole program tonight. How is it that the global syndicate is able to make their followers afraid and yet make them violent at the same time? 40% of them report that they are very concerned that let's see, listen, I don't know, Democrats, okay, reporting that they're very concerned that Trump's opponents will resort to violence, compared to 36% of Republicans and 23% of those supporting other parties. Nearly 2/3, 65% of Republicans, 59% of Democrats, and 49% of other parties say that they are at least somewhat concerned that Trump opponents will become violent. I mean, this is what happens. When Democrats lose, they get violent. Voters are actually less concerned that impeaching and removing Trump from office will prompt violence, 53%, than are worried that anti-Trumpers will resort to violence if he's not impeached. So 53% saying not going to be violence if he is, and 59% that they would be violent if he's not impeached. 1 in 4 voters say they're very concerned that Trump's impeachment and removal from office will lead to violence, while 29% report that they are somewhat concerned ousting Trump will result in violence. So, here's my feelings on the impeachment, because I know President Trump kind of came out and said, I want a trial. You all heard that. I reached out Sunday night and again Monday morning on national radio, not on a podcast, but on actual real radio nationwide. And I implored the president not to want a trial. I implored him to stop the impeachment by leaning on the 31 Democrats that are going to be elected in red states to stop the impeachment. In other words, don't let Pelosi get to 218 votes. And here's my thinking on this. Now, I'm not trying to put fear out there, but I'm just saying I'm a statistician and I'm a forward thinker, kind of a futant of sorts, and I'm looking at the situation, and this is what I see. If the Democrats are able to impeach the president before the election, this has only happened one time before in American history, and that's with President Johnson, and not Johnson, but now I've lost my place. But the point is that president was impeached while in office and did not get the nomination of his party. They actually primaried him and ran another candidate against him, and so he lost. He was never elected. The Democrats will, because now they have something they didn't have back then. What they have now is a sycophant press. So don't think for a minute that every single press outlet in the world isn't going to run 24 hours a day, that you can't put an impeached president on the ballot. That's a constitutional crisis, they'll say. Because according to the Constitution, when a president is impeached, now I know removed from office, but they're going to twist it and say, if a president is impeached, he cannot hold public office. That's what they're going to press. And they're going to try to turn the Senate. Now, the reason that I said it was not a very good idea for him to go through with this impeachment to ask for a trial, because it's a little bit like putting a blindfold on and trusting the Senate to walk you, the president, across a tightrope to the other side. Now, I ask you this question. Do you think that 35% of the Senate is compromised? I'll look for the answer in the chat room here. Okay. Let me ask you this then. Do you think 50% of the Senate is compromised? I think it's a little better than that too. I would say that you're probably pretty comfortable with 70% of the Senate being compromised. Something like that, right? Child porn, taxes delinquent, debts, some kind of payoff to some girl, marital problems, right? 70% have something that they don't want released to the general public. Well, you'd be surprised to know that it only takes three senators. That's it. 3 senators joining the Democrats to make a motion that the rules of the Senate are changed. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to federal court or not, but courts run on rules. They have a blue book and a brown book, and the federal rule book has a series of rules that apply in all federal courts. They're agreed upon, and everybody knows what they are. And of course, you don't want to face a baseball team where the coach knows the rule book better than your coach, right? So all the lawyers know the rule book. But the thing about the Senate is they don't have a book like that. I mean, they do. But each time they have a, quote, trial, they change the rules. Now, if 51 senators, no, it doesn't take 67, not to change the rules. It only takes 51. If 51 senators agree on 2 things, first of all, we're going to have a secret ballot. We're not going to have, where each senator is counted because, hey, it's dangerous. I just read it to you. 59% of the people think that never-Trumpers will be violent. 53% think that people that, will support Trump are going to be violent. They're afraid of violence. They're afraid for their families, so they're going to vote for a secret ballot. Then what they're going to do with the secret ballot is they're going to alter the rules. They're going to add some rules. And I said, well, let's think of some rules. The first one I thought of was this. The Senate has decided that it is the president and the president alone that is on trial here. Congress has impeached the president. Now it's up to the Senate to try that impeachment. So nobody but the president is going to be accused of anything. Rule number 2, no candidate for president or family member of candidate for president can be called as a witness. Now, why is that? Well, because that would mean that the Senate trial would be meddling with the election in 2020. And they'll say, well, we're not going to meddle with the election in 2020. We're trying the president. Rule number 3, no elected official and no bureaucratic official can be called as a witness. And that's just the way it's going to be. They're not going to attack members of the Senate, members of the House, or members of any bureaucracy, including ambassadors, as part of the trial. They're only going to consider the facts against the president. Oh, there's one more rule. No foreign officials or foreign citizens will be called as witnesses because that will be seen as foreign meddling in the 2020 election. Yeah, now you see how narrow the choices are getting. You see how kind of loosey-goosey this rope is getting, and the president's blindfolded and trusting the Senate to get him across to the other side. Plus, you heard the threat, right? The threat from Joe Biden. And the threat from Joe Biden was to Lindsey Graham. And what did he say? Oh, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. What does that say to you? Well, it says to me that the folks down at the good old FBI, the opposition research firm for the Democratic National Committee, has dirt on Lindsey Graham. And they probably gave it to Joe Biden. As soon as they go to court, as soon as the Senate begins that trial, Lindsey Graham, who's the head of the committee, head of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, he's going to be compromised. So this is what I'm telling you. A multi-million-dollar ad blitz that features military veterans urging vulnerable Republicans in swing districts to support the impeachment inquiry into President Trump is funded by a progressive dark money group backed by, guess who? Yep, your favorite globalist billionaire, George Soros. The military veterans in the ads urge Republican representatives to put country over politics by holding Trump accountable for, quote, abusing his office and risking national security for his own gain. I know, it infuriates me too. Where has he gained? Where has he gained? He's lost everything that he's put forth. He's lost money. He's given up his salary. He's getting nothing and doing everything. By the way, dark money refers to political spending by nonprofits that are not required to disclose their donors. The Daily Caller said the ads disclose they're paid for by the group Defend American Democracy. But DC business registration documents reveal the group is one of the many projects of the 1630 Fund, a dark money nonprofit that received $4.5 million from Soros's Open Society Policy Center between 2012 and 2017. The 1630 Fund, by the way, reported receiving $52 million from a single anonymous donor in 2018. But as a 501c4 nonprofit, it is not required to disclose the identity of its donors. Robert McGuire, a research director for the liberal watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, said that the 1630 Fund is one of the few dark money funds that has gone into the 100 million plus range. 1630 Fund best known project is Demand Justice. That sounds good too, doesn't it? But it spearheaded the opposition to the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation in 2018. You'll recall that Christine Blasey Ford was a CIA trainer. Her PhD thesis is on training people in the art of self-hypnosis so that they can lie under duress and before a lie detector. She's an expert at training people how to do that. So she comes in, she tells a lie that's so convincing that she receives an award for it and everybody in the world believes her, but also everybody believed Brett Kavanaugh. So you can't believe both of them, but as it turns out, they did believe both of them. They just believed Brett Kavanaugh a little bit more. So now we know that during this hearing that was going on, I would have asked a couple more questions myself. Let me share a couple of those questions with you. Ms. Ford, is it true that you have 17 GoFundMe accounts? Oh, you're not aware of that? Did you know that in your 17 GoFundMe accounts, you've accumulated more than $1 million in the last 9 days during this event here? Oh, you weren't aware of that either? Well, we have a list of the donors, so I just want to ask you one other question. Is anybody in this room one of the donors to your GoFundMe account? Yeah, those were questions I would have asked. Turns out that this anonymous source who put money in 2018 probably laundered some of that money straight into Christine Blasey Ford's GoFundMe, and she was well paid for her lie. Let's see here. A nonprofit funded by Soros and the State Department in the Ukraine, the Anti-Corruption Action Center, has become part of the impeachment story. Investigative reporter John Solomon reported 2 witnesses who testified for the Democrats in public impeachment hearings last week pressed Ukraine to drop its investigations of that group. George Kent of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev requested in a letter to the Ukraine General Prosecutor's Office in April of 2016. By the way, this is before we even knew who the nominee was. April of 2016, we still had 3 in the race. We still had Ted Cruz, we still had John Kasich, and we still had Donald Trump. We didn't know who the nominee was going to be. Yet, in its prosecution of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, they moved that investigation be dropped. Now, a few months later, Ukraine new general prosecutor Yuri Lutsenko said the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, you know who we're talking about, right, asked him off of a list not to prosecute the Anti-Corruption Action Center. This is one of the names on the list that Yovanovitch gave to the new president of Ukraine. The other one was Burisma. John Solomon on Friday stood by his reporting, despite denials by Democratic witnesses, including Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vidman, a National Security Council official. Solomon wrote that Ukrainian officials told him the U.S. diplomats' implied message to Ukrainian prosecutors was clear. Don't target the Anti-Corruption Action Center in the middle of an American presidential election in which Soros was backing Hillary Clinton to succeed another Soros favorite, Barack Obama. This is the way the global syndicate works. They groom all the candidates. So they just move from one groomed candidate to another. The only ungroomed candidate there was, as far as I know, was Donald Trump. And that's why they've been trying to get him out of office. The Ukrainian officials saw this as an unusual intervention. We're not normally in the business of telling a country's police force who they can and can't pursue unless it involves an American citizen we think is wrongly accused. Solomon reported that ultimately no action was taken against the Soros group, and it remains thriving to this very day. This is very similar to the Organization for Action, which is run by Barack Obama. It funds 30,000 street activists known as the Black Bloc to conduct violent protests against what they call fascism. And by the way, Adam Schiff's daughter is married to George Soros' son. Pretty crazy, huh? Let's see. I got enough time to cover this. I call this Spies Among Us. This is going to kind of blow your mind a little bit because you'll be able to see that it's not just Ukrainians. It's not just Russians. The global syndicate has spies from just about every major nation and some of the non-major ones inside our country working for them. A California man accused of spying for China's security service pleaded guilty to a U.S. criminal charge in a case touted by prosecutors as a rare glimpse into how Beijing gathers intelligence in America. His name is Shihua Ed Peng, who became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2012. He was charged in September last month, or a couple months ago, with acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign government. That means he was a spy, okay? Now, my guess is he came to this country under the EB-5 program. That's a program where the Chinese put up money to put into American startups, like manufacturing, for instance, or computer programming. And in exchange for the Chinese putting up this money that this U.S. company couldn't get any other way because they don't have enough credit, they don't have enough sales, they have to take a couple of Chinese nationals on their staff. Those Chinese nationals are issued green cards. In a short amount of time, usually 1 to 2 years, those Chinese nationals with green cards can become naturalized citizens. This is the EB-5 program. Now, you have to understand that this system was run by the Clintons, okay? These Chinese nationals are shipped to this country as part of the program in exchange for Chinese investment into these American business startups. The lack of American investors forces American startups to look elsewhere for capital. They usually end up at Gulf States Capital, which was run by Hillary Clinton's brother. They processed 85% of the EB-5 grant money from China. The Chinese nationals come here under the grant to work for the company, getting the grant. They get green cards, and then after 2 years, it allows them to get on a quick path to citizenship through naturalization. So now you know where Mr. Peng came from. As part of his plea agreement, the U.S. will recommend a 4-year prison sentence and a $30,000 fine instead of the maximum penalty of 10 years incarceration and a $250,000 fine. A prosecutor told the judge Monday in Oakland federal court. Now, a U.S. crackdown on national security espionage by the Chinese government and theft of intellectual property that began under former President Barack Obama has escalated during the Trump administration's trade war with China. One of the things that we're trying to take care of in this trade war is what we call technology transfer. I think it was the first or second time I went to China. I went to a big meeting. We went up on stage. We were photographed. We, big line of people, a big shindig. An American ambassador was there. A lot of pomp and circumstance. And it was a technology transfer meeting. So they gave us these big red folders, and what we had to do was sign over our technology to the Chinese in exchange for the Chinese putting up the money to manufacture. Well, many of us did not sign, and we walked away from that meeting. It was not in our best interest to do, but it happens all the time because American companies are desperate for the money to get started, and it wasn't and still isn't available in the United States. So Mr. Peng is 56 years old. And after he became naturalized, guess where he worked? He worked as a guide for Chinese tourists in the San Francisco area, according to prosecutors. San Francisco, not far from Silicon Valley. He was snared in a sting operation in which he allegedly hid envelopes with $10,000 to $20,000 in cash in hotel rooms and returned later to pick up memory cards containing classified security information that had been planted by U.S. agents. Those memory devices loaded with prints and specs for American technology were smuggled to China when Mr. Peng would travel there. Now, there's no estimate on how much technology Mr. Peng bought and sent to China. There's no estimate on how many Chinese agents are doing exactly the same thing in other locations. The money comes from Chinese banks, and it is laundered through semi-wealthy individuals living in America. That is likely how Mr. Peng was discovered. It is doubtful that he smuggled the cash into the country. Someone else did that. The engineers, the secretaries, and the middle managers who stole the technology from their own companies would then sell the technology to the Chinese for personal wealth. During the Obama administration, everybody looked the other way. It was business as usual. And during the Trump administration, they are clamping down on this kind of activity. After staging each of the so-called dead drops at hotels in Oakland and Newark, California, as well as Columbus, Georgia, at least one of the FBI recorded with a hidden video camera Mr. Peng would later fly to China with the cards to deliver them to his handlers at the Ministry of State Security. Self-proclaimed Chinese spy William Wang, who defected to Australia, is a fraud and a wanted criminal. The U.S. said it uncovered Peng's identity as a spy through a double agent operation in China started in March of 2015. John Demers, the Assistant U.S. Attorney General for National Security, said when Mr. Peng was arrested that his case exposes how Chinese intelligence officers collect information without having to step foot actually inside our country. Peng's lawyer declined to comment after Monday's hearing. So, what kind of technology are they transferring? It could be weapons. It could be. More than likely, it is space technology. More than likely, it's computer technology, it's space technology, it's the ability to build rockets, lift equipment, orbit equipment, and get equipment to other planets. And there's a race going on. The United States and China are rapidly building space warfare capabilities as part of a race to dominate the zone outside Earth's atmosphere. The Chinese aren't thinking up the advanced technology. They're stealing the advanced technology. Oh, they're good at building it. They're good at following instructions. They're good at making things off of prints. We have tools made by them all the time. Big tools, expensive tools. They're faster and they're cheaper than the shops we have here in this country. And I'm sorry to say, but we bought tons and tons and tons, hundreds of tons of tools from China, and they're operating right now in plants all over the United States. Air Force General John W. Raymond, who's the commander of the Pentagon's new Space Command, said last week that the threat of attacks against vital American satellites is very real. That is to say, equipment that the Chinese are putting into space is capable of fighting other satellites in space. And those satellites don't have defensive capabilities. When you put those satellites up, they're as light and as efficient as they can be, but they are delicate. They stay in orbit because there's not supposed to be anything near them. They're in an orbit all by themselves. They're in an altitude all by themselves. They don't collide with other things. They bounce radio waves. They take pictures. They monitor weather. They relay data. And they're vulnerable. And if something takes them out, we lose that capability. You know how crippled you would be if your cell phone went out. You know how lost you would be if you were in a strange city and suddenly your GPS system stopped working. It gets a lot worse when we're talking about military capabilities. He said, I can tell you from my perspective, the scope, scale, and complexity of that threat is alive and well, and it is very, very concerning. China's strategy for dominating space was detailed this month in the annual report of the Congressional U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. The commission warned that China wants to dominate the zone between Earth and the moon. It's known as the cislunar space. Okay? This is the gap between the Earth and the moon. And I've said for a long time, for probably 30 years, he who controls the moon will control the Earth because it gives you that massive satellite, the ability to defend yourself, and access to unlimited energy. Beijing is clearly of the view that the country that leads in space may also be economically and militarily dominant on Earth, and I believe that is true as well. Similarly, the Chinese military joint staff in 2018 said the goal is to achieve space superiority. It's difficult to do if you're not innovating, but it's not so difficult to do if you're stealing the innovations of your enemy about as fast as they can come up with them. Why? Because you have spies operating inside the system. The EB-5 program, and of course there's probably no shortage of Americans that would like to have an extra $250,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 for one little drawing, one little math formula, one little chemical formula. Absolutely. The 4-star general said China and Russia are the main space warfare threats, and that the U.S. needs to quickly develop offensive and defensive capabilities to deter their weapons and be able to fight in space if needed. You remember that we had that space race once with the Soviets, and they lost. Russia's not in that race. They already had that race, and they lost. Well, now we're in it, and I don't know if we can win it or not. We're going to take a quick break in about 2 minutes, for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll be back at the top of the hour with more America Free Radio here on the Revolution Radio Network on freedomslips.com. Thanks for being in the chat room. And don't forget to see that little donate button at the bottom there, top chat. You can put any amount in there you want, and you can show support for the program. I'd be happy to read your comments if they're in there. And I appreciate all that are in there. I'll try to read it during the break. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. More America Free Radio coming at you right after this.
Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
My name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday at 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week.
Yes.
But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting.
Yes, I see.
By a simple majority in the case of purely internal affairs.
Be quiet.
But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more...
Be quiet.
I order you to be quiet.
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left.
Yes, I have.
Look!
It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible.
You're a loony.
The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your idea, bring your voice. Got nothing. Here, freedomslips.com. All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to America Free Radio. Yeah, MG says, what if somebody already owns the moon? I guess we'll find out when we get there, won't we? But, there are other projects, other things to think about. By the way, I want to let you know that, let's see here. If you make international phone calls, some people do, some people don't. Some people who make them use the W app or the T app or the S app or the P app. And that means that the other person has to have the same app for you to talk to them. It also means that all of your data is collected and sold by those app owners. But there's one app where that doesn't happen. I mean, none of it. And that's Wowitel. 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 The icon is there for those of you that can see it on YouTube. If you go to wowitel.com and use the promo code BA2019, capital B, capital A, that's my initials, BA2019, you'll get a discount, and it'll be an excellent way for you to make international calls, as many as you want, and the receiving party doesn't have to have the app at all. You can call landlines, you can call any country in the world, unlimited, with satellite clarity from your cell phone, and they don't have to have the app. If you're in business, this is a really, really important thing. Come on, you don't want to chintz out and, send an email to them saying, oh, download this, free app so I can call you and it doesn't cost me any money. Don't cheap out on that. Get the app, call like a grown-up, and then you'll be fine. All right, I want to go to this page right here, just to let you know that it is going to be Black Friday in a couple days. And you may not know what to get your friends. You may not know what to get your family. Well, I am going to make a suggestion. How about a great book? I have 10 of them in print. They're rotating covers of the copies of the book right there. Several different stories from borderline fiction to full-on fiction. Everything's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble under my name, Brooks Agnew. So whatever service you like using, paperback, electronic, and guess what you get if you buy the paperback or the electronic version of any one of my last 7 books. That's right. You get the audio version for free. I will give you the audio version of any book that you buy, electronic or paperback. Now, that's a great deal. So if you're not a good reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you. Let's go ahead and get back to our program now because we got a lot going on here. I've been replaced. I kind of hate it. I don't really like it because although I made the proposal to the president that I would complete the border wall in 16 months if he would put me in charge. It looks like Jared Kushner has been given the job instead of overseeing the construction of the border wall. This is as of, I guess, yesterday. Additionally, Kushner has told aides that President Donald Trump wants at least 400 miles built by Election Day. Trump is said to be frustrated with the lack of progress as none of his wall has really been built, only about 78 miles of what has been described as new border wall built so far. And a lot of the old dilapidated wall, some of it was fences, some of it were just bolsters, balusters to prevent people from driving cars, but you could walk across the border pretty easily. That's been replaced. Lots and lots and lots of that's been replaced. But we want wall. That's one of the 2 things that we really elected him to do. The point is to get as much built as possible in the next year, so the president can say, in the face of intense, almost demented opposition, you see, we were successful in stopping you from building the wall. No, that's not what they're going to say. What they're going to say is, you see, you're a liar. You said you were going to build the wall and you didn't build it. Of course, we were stopping you at every turn. We used federal judges. We stopped your funding. We used the press. We deluged the border with bodies from El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala. But it's still your fault. So Mark Krikorian, who's director of the Center for Immigration Studies, a think tank that seeks to restrict immigration and supports many of Trump's policies, made several comments. Let's see, Senator Kevin Cramer said his hope was Kushner would put a more of a laser focus on the project. Jared's a smart guy, but I don't think he's ever built anything in his life. I don't think he's ever managed a project in his life. I mean, maybe he's managed a hedge fund. Maybe he, wears a good suit. He's certainly married a beautiful woman, certainly a great dad, but he's never built anything in his life. Mr. President, if you want the wall built, just tell me to build it, okay? I'm a 6 Sigma master black belt. I'm used to building big projects like this. I can have the wall done from coast to coast in 16 months. Okay? I'm just saying. I would charge you nothing. I would charge you nothing. I would do it for free. So there. MG said in the chat room, he'd do it in 15 months. You're hired. Oh, what a great chat room. I love these guys. They're great. All right. This is where the past meets the future, so I want to go to the past a little bit. Let's go back about to the year 1862. In the aftermath of the costly victory at Shiloh in 1862, career bureaucrats in Washington called for the removal of General Ulysses S. Grant. Of course, Lincoln responded, I can't spare this man because he fights. Our first Republican president had the fortitude to stick with it when it counts. And he wanted generals such as Grant who did the same. You'll recall that at the beginning of the war, it favored the South in every skirmish and every battle. They won everything until the scorched earth methods began to be utilized against the Southern Americans. During Wednesday's House Intelligence Committee hearings, Republican rank and file members showed some nads, and they stood up to the shifters. And this is the sort of thing we've come to expect from Representative Jim Jordan. It's when we saw, you remember Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and John Ratcliffe busting it out, that we started to cheer. These three are all quite different breeds of Republican. Finally, they are fighting hard and using smart positions to maneuver around shift for brains barriers to justice. Republicans challenge the left's narrative, not only on the facts, but on the process as well. They've done good work to expose this investigation as the sham impeachment hearing it really is. We haven't seen this sort of energy and poise from Republicans since the Kavanaugh saga, and we have rarely seen it at all during President Trump's time in office. For so long, the GOP has been afraid of its shadow. When things get tough, they start crying and they look like little kids being punished. We have watched them drop the ball over and over and over again on budget shutdown standoffs and stunningly, Obamacare. Come on. The single issue they railed against for years on the campaign trail, but they failed to repeal under unified government. Well, Wednesday's hearing was not what we've come to expect from the GOP. They weren't a bunch of little whiny butts. We've gotten used to the fence straddling on the impeachment. Romney has a track record of leaving the gloves on, dating back to his ill-fated attempt to beat former President Barack Obama. And in terms of Civil War analogies, Romney would be General George McClellan, who, despite overwhelming advantage in numbers and supplies, managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Americans want Republicans who stand up and don't back down. That's exactly why Donald Trump's approval rating remains so high among Americans. For all of us, for all these issues that many have with his tweeting and his hubris and his hair, the president remains focused on making good on his campaign promises. He is issue-focused. Although we hired him to build the wall and drain the swamp, none of us had any idea just how hard those would be to accomplish. We need to see more Republicans acting like those three. Make no mistake here. The Senate rules can be changed, as I said, with a simple majority, which the Democrats already have. Yes, they do. Yes, they do, because of the three rhinos, okay? The three rhinos will give them the vote. They will make it a secret ballot. They will change the rules to forbid Trump's team from calling their own witnesses, and it'll be just as frustrating as when Shift for Brains was running the Shift show down in the basement. Impeachment needs to be a losing issue for the Democrats, and it needs to be that now. Not 2 months from now in the Senate. Don't walk the president in there blindfolded and trust the Senate to walk him safely across the tightrope of impeachment. You will lose America if that happens. You don't even know what a constitutional crisis looks like until you try to reelect an impeached Donald Trump for a second term. Believe me, I'm just telling you, there's no fake stream news out there that will let them get away with it. Like Lincoln in the spring of 1862, the GOP needs leadership that won't shy away from a fight. Jordan, Stefanik, Ratcliffe, and the rest of the Republicans on the committee need to keep up the pressure. You hear me, Devin Nunes? Keep up the pressure and show your colleagues in the House and the Senate that they cannot impeach 63 million Americans. And I would venture to say it's probably more like 80 million Americans now with the walkaway movement, the rise in Black and Hispanic support. I think we're probably talking about 80 million Americans. You just cannot impeach America. All right. You know what's going on in Hong Kong, right? We talked about Hong Kong Sunday night. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about another aspect of this because there's been a recent decision, recent legislation that's been proposed, and recent positions that have been made in the U.S. Senate that are going to rub China the wrong way. And this is... It's kind of where we want to go, but it's kind of where we don't want to go. And here's why. You see, Hong Kong was a free country for a long time. One China, two systems, right? Hong Kong was a democracy. Hong Kong was free. And you can't give people freedom, capitalism, success. There are a lot of billionaires in Hong Kong and their kids. And then take it away. And that's where we are. Now, they're supposed to have 25 years left on this sort of probationary time before China takes over the entire piece of real estate. But China's running out of money. But two reasons. One is, of course, the pressure that's being put on China in the trade war. China has been used to having its own way. China's been used to filling up shipping containers, shipping them over here, selling the stuff in it, and making so much money they could just leave the shipping containers here. How many people out there have a shipping container seller in their city? We have two of them. I mean, on my way to work, I passed two huge yards full of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shipping containers that are empty. I mean, you can buy them. You can, buy them to put storage on the farm. You can buy them to build apartments. There's weird stuff you can build with shipping containers, and they're cheap. They're cheap. They're not so cheap that the steel, can just be recycled, but they're cheap enough that you can do something with them that you want and not have to ship them empty back to China. That's how much money they were making. They made so much money that they had to spend their money by building ghost cities over there, big ones like Jiangsu City and others, skyscrapers, factories, roads, bullet trains, all this stuff. And there's no people. There's no people to fill up those cities because there are no jobs there. What happened was, once this pressure started being put on China, they started running low on cash. And what this means is that they don't have the reserve capital anymore to back the debt that they're carrying. They're carrying way too much debt for the amount of capital that they've got on hand. Who has the capital? Well, Hong Kong has the capital. So China moves in 25 years ahead of schedule to begin extradition of people who are bucking Chinese policy publicly. And, once they're arrested, they can be put on trains and hauled to mainland China. They can have their organs extracted and they can be put in prison camps. And that's exactly what's happening to them. So the Chinese youth, smart, intelligent, energetic, not old enough to remember what went on in Tiananmen Square, they are standing up against the Chinese. And the Chinese, China's becoming more and more violent, and they're also putting fake protesters into the group of protesters to commit violence to make public opinion turn against them. Believe me, the Chinese government's expert at doing this. It isn't working because there are a lot of people in mainland China that know what's going on, and they are on Hong Kong's side, although secretly. So, President Trump is still playing coy about whether he plans to sign a bill declaring support for the Hong Kong protesters over the objection of Chinese government. But the strain that this controversy is causing is noticeable. It's very difficult to ignore right now. I mean, President Trump is saying, hey, President Xi and I, we get along very well. He's a great guy. You've heard him say it. You've heard it. He said it today. He said it last night at the rally. But on the other hand, after the smiling is over and the handshake is over and, all the toasting is done, President Xi is moving militarily against Hong Kong. Slowly at first, but it's going to get worse and worse. And these kids realize they're probably going to have to go the distance. Otherwise, they're going to end up in a camp somewhere because their face has been recognized and they're not going to get away with it. An editorial published yesterday by the Global Times, a popular Chinese tabloid and Communist Party mouthpiece, slammed our own Senator Ted Cruz over his support for the Taiwan Symbols of Sovereignty Act. Among other provisions, the act will legalize the display of the Taiwanese flag at U.S. government agencies. You remember the movie Top Gun that just is coming out or has come out. Tom Cruise has a jacket on, and on the jacket, on the back, were flags from the original Top Gun. Well, these flags, namely the Taiwanese flag, they're offensive to China. And China's the money behind the film. So they actually had to CG the flags out of the flight jacket of Tom Cruise. Yeah, they had to CG those flags out. Now, it might not seem like much, but these changes, they carry some heavy symbolism, okay? If passed, it's going to allow hitherto prohibited deference to the Taiwanese flag, ultimately contributing to the legitimization of Taiwan as an independent state. That is not going to fly very well in China. In response, Beijing blasted Ted Cruz and policy advisor and former Trump aide Christian Whitten, accusing them of trying to court relevance by going after China. In the eyes of certain U.S. politicians like Cruz and Whitten, the one China policy has inflicted extreme insults to Taiwan citizens and set restrictions for the U.S. But it is exactly this policy that has helped maintain stable China-U.S. ties over the past 40 years. There's a lot going on there, a lot of tension going on. I don't think it'll turn into a shooting war. I'll tell you why. China's been around for a long time, way longer than the United States has been around. But China's never won a war, ever, outside its own borders, ever. They've had skirmishes and wars inside, dynasties inside China, but not outside China. They've been beat by everybody. Britain, Marco Polo, the United States, Japan, everybody beat China. China cannot conduct a war outside their own country. Because you know why. Because if they put a force together and they come to Long Beach, when they get off that boat, those Chinese troops are not going to fight. They're going to run for Kansas. They're going to run for Oklahoma. They want a farm. They want a ranch. They don't want to go back to China. They are Chinese. I know that. But they're not China. They're not communists. Inside everybody, there is a God-given desire to be free. Nobody's going to go fight on foreign soil for a government that oppresses them. They're not going to do it. And mostly, yes, men will be in those armies. And most of those men, they don't have families back home because they had one-child policies during this time. They have no ties to China. And that's why they won't fight wars outside their country. All right. Let's see how much time I got. Do I want to cover this part on the real Ukrainian dirt? I will if I have time. I'm going to try and change gears a little bit here because, in the news, of course, there has been another explosion in Texas. Yes, I understand you guys want to talk about child abuse and child trafficking and all that, but I only have 2 hours and I don't really want to discuss that tonight. So you could talk about it in the chat room if you want, but I don't want to talk about it tonight because it hurts my heart to talk about it. I want to talk about the Texas explosion just for a little bit. The Port Neches chemical plant, there's been 2 explosions and an ongoing fire prompted widespread mandatory evacuations today, just about, 18 hours ago, if that. The facility owned by Houston-based Texas Petroleum Chemicals, they're known as TPC Group. They manufacture 1,3-butadiene. Now, 1,3-butadiene, yes, it's very, very flammable, but it's also an active ingredient in a lot of polymerization fuels, technologies, and stuff like that. So it is cracked off of petroleum. It is made in fairly high quantities in this plant, and it is very explosive. And it's also considered a high priority violator by the EPA for more than 2 years. They've been out of compliance with federal clean air laws since the agency's last inspection in August of 2017. And most of this is for what we call fugitive emissions. Valve leaks, fitting leaks, tiny spills. It adds up. You got to account for all that stuff. And when you get over the limit, then you have to take action, or they take enforcement actions against you. The state data shows that the facility is reported spewing more air pollution than allowed. And they've done it 5 times this year. And it could be really bad, but I have to tell you, after being in the biodiesel business, I've designed and built the nation's only dry process biodiesel plant. It did not operate profitably. I wanted it to operate profitably. The issue is that the EPA, working for the petroleum industry, changed the amount of methanol that could be residing in the finished fuel. It used to be 2%, which is about what you can get through standard distillation, heating the fuel up to about, 260 degrees Fahrenheit, letting the alcohol flash off, condensing the alcohol, the methanol, and recycling it back into the process. Believe me, that fuel's never going to reach that temperature ever again. It's going to be stored at room temperature. It might get up to 100 somewhere in some tank in the sunshine. But that methanol is never going to come off. It's chemical methanol, what's left, that 2%. But what the petroleum industry did is they leaned on the EPA, and the EPA reduced the amount of residual methanol to 0.2%. Well, the issue with this is that it takes 90% more energy to get that last 0.2%, to get down to the 0.2% from 2%. And that amount of energy requires so much energy that the fuel ends up going from about $1.79 a gallon to $2.80 a gallon to produce. And so you can see that biodiesel becomes not financially feasible anymore. Now, there was a blending credit of 99 cents that the Department of Energy was offering, and that was really the only profit that was available in the fuel. And we knew that the blending credit was eventually going to go away. It wasn't enough to compensate for variance in the feedstock, which we were using canola oil for the feedstock to make the fuel. Not edible, not viable canola oil, but non-viable canola oil. And what ended up happening is the biodiesel plant went broke. So the nation's only dry process biodiesel plant went extinct. But it could have been very, very profitable and have been very, very clean, and it would have made diesel engines last a long, long time. But that's the way the EPA works. So when the EPA says, oh, this plant was in violation 5 times during the year, it doesn't really say a lot. I'm just saying a few hundred pounds of 1,3-butadiene leaked into the atmosphere, that's nothing. That's nothing. It is nothing. And they set these standards, and then they try to hold these standards on the plant. That is not the issue. That is not the issue. That isn't what caused the explosion. It just makes for good news. The exact cause of the fire and the explosion, probably static electricity, probably improper grounding, probably sparks off of tools, something like that. I don't think anybody was welding on live piping. It could happen. I've seen it happen before, but I doubt it. The issue is that this is a colorless gas, which is used to make. It's used to make. Polystyrene. Okay, it's used to make plastic. It's also used to make tires. Okay, rubber. All this stuff, you need the 1,3-butadiene to make the polyol, and that's the raw material. So in its raw form, yes, it is a carcinogen, but what isn't? What isn't? Okay, all the polyols are a carcinogen, but once they're polymerized, tires are not a carcinogen. This plastic glass right here, it's not a carcinogen. Absolutely not. Why? Because it's all polymerized. It's all one molecule now. There's no monomers to cause you a problem. So 1,3-butadiene is unsaturated hydrocarbon, and it is reactive. Okay, it's reactive. It's supposed to be reactive. I mean, what is it made of plastic? This microphone, the foam rubber, this mouse, the seat I'm sitting in. Plastic is plastic is plastic. Well, 1,3-butadiene is one of the link molecules that's used to put this together. It's a solvent, but it's much more than that. So it's not, I mean, to say that it's a carcinogen is disingenuous. So the EPA and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, they fined TPC for the air emissions violations over half a dozen times in the past 5 years. So what? It's cost of new business. You clean it up, you pay your fine, you learn your lesson, and you put a quality alert on, and you go on. The last federal censure TPC faced was in 2017, is ordered under consent decree to pay a civil penalty of what? $72,000. Big deal. Less than the cost of a Ford pickup truck. But environmental and consumer advocacy groups on Wednesday, today, said that those penalties, the civil ones, add up to less than $200,000. That's what I'm saying. It's just not much of a big deal here. When you look at these facilities and their compliance histories, it's like a rap sheet, said Elena Kraft, Senior Director for Climate and Health at the Environmental Defense Fund. That is really the Deputy Chief Director of Paper Towels. I'm just telling you. It's wah. It's nothing. She probably doesn't get paid for that position. We see many times these companies, they violate, and ultimately, this can lead to sloppy work conditions, and then you have a fugitive leak, and that leak gets sparked, and then you have an explosion. Do I think that's what happened in this case? I don't know, but I know explosions do happen, and this one was a mess, okay? And that's what's going on down there in Texas. All right, I want to spend some time on what I call word salad. I travel around and I go to different conventions and I speak. I speak on math, I speak on science, I speak on resonance. We talk about the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. We talk about cymatics. We talk about the contribution human energy makes to our environment. And the human energy can come in a lot of different frequencies. Hopefully it's high frequencies, but it's not always. We do contribute to the energy environment on this planet. And we hear words at these conventions, and you probably hear them on various websites and Facebook and Twitter and blah, blah, blah. Different words that are supposed to make you think two things. One is the person that's saying them must be really smart. And the other is you must not know what's really going on because you don't know the meaning or the application of these words, and so you must pay closer attention and hopefully pay money. So one of those words, and you could just let me know by a show of hands or money in the chat room if you've heard this word, false matrix. Yes? As opposed to what? As opposed to a true matrix? Let's just talk about a matrix. Let's talk about the movie. That's a good point. I get that. The movie The Matrix was written about in movie form a artificial intelligence that begins to compete with humankind for existence on the planet. It becomes self-aware. And it decides that humans are kind of an infection, kind of a bacteria on the planet. But that maybe they could go into competition with one another. And so the humans said, well, these machines, they're replicating each other. They're thinking for themselves. They're edging us on technology and energy and resources. And so we're going to go to war with them. And so they did. They went to war with the machines, and the humans were losing the battle. And what they decided to do in order to win was something desperate, just desperate. What they decided to do was to do what, volcanoes would have done for us eventually. They decided to set the sky on fire. They decided to blow off nuclear weapons and pump a bunch of particulate matter up into the sky because the computers, the artificial intelligence, was powering itself from sunlight. One by one, mankind had cut them off from the grid, hoping that, hey, we disconnect them from the grid, they'll power down, and we'll take everything back over again. Well, the computers got smart, and they went for another battery source. And the battery source was us. It was our bodies. Our bodies became like D-cell batteries. But in the beginning, what they did is they hooked us up and they put us unconscious and kept us alive by feeding us nutrients and fed to our brain a utopian world. Well, the experiment was a failure. Without challenge, without some unknown aspect to life, humans did not prosper, and the bodies began to die off, and the batteries began to go dead, and the power source was no good for them. So they created a matrix. And the matrix was a system of a false existence. It was real in the sense that the brain saw and smelled and experienced challenge and mystery and struggle and personality conflicts and love and all the things it would normally experience, only without the body. The body was no longer the biological transducer. The transducer was replaced by the computer system. That's the setting for the matrix, right? That is the matrix. So today, what I say the matrix is they've put a tube down your throat to feed you enough to get you by, whether it's GMOs or whatever it is. And they've dropped your body into a soupy bath of fake news so that you have this perspective of the world that they have made for you, the global syndicate. And the next jump to make this correlate, and the reason why the writer was so profound, why this movie resonated with people so well, besides Keanu Reeves playing the role of Neo very, very well, was that we as a human being can generate quite a bit of voltage, and we were kind of electrically connected with these things in the back of our neck and down our spine and along our arms, that our nervous system was connected to the grid, and all of that cumulative electricity was used to power the computers. Well, we're not connected, are we? You don't have a bolt in the back of your neck. You don't have any cables connected to your arms, do you? I mean, I have these things right here connected to my ears so I can hear what's going on in my microphone, and I can hear what's going on in the music in the background when the break time comes. But that's it. Well, I guess yes, I'm connected right here too. I got this thing right here, and I guess I'm sort of connected. You ever go anywhere without it? Okay, the shower maybe. I mean, but when you sleep, it's on, right? It's on beside your bed. You use it as the alarm. I do. Yes. You get text, you make calls, you use it for directions, where to go and all that. What else do you use it for? Ah, yes, to get your news. To get your news, to connect to the outside world. And so that's the connection. That's the matrix that's created. That's the soupy bath of fake news that you're put into. Why? Where does the battery connection come from? Because our conscious energy, our will, our desire is actually an energy input into the local universe. Now, one person, depending on how, great and powerful and intelligent they are, can have quite an effect. They can have quite an effect on a country. They can have quite an effect on a company. They can have quite an effect on a family, on a relationship. Of course. But by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, by the billions, they can have a lot of energy, a lot of conscious energy on a lot of different levels. And I'm going to talk to them about that. I'm going to address that here. So what the global syndicate is doing is they are manifesting their future the way they have designed it. And what they've done is they've bathed you in a bath of fake news. So that's your environment. That's what you understand. That's what you see as reality. They give you the nutrients of food and alcohol and drugs and vapes and whatever else that you consume, just enough so that you will put off the energy that they want at the frequency they have set. Yes, it's dark. Yes, it's foreboding. Yes, you're marching inexorably toward Armageddon because that's where they want to go. You're manifesting their future for them because they are giving you the energy that gives you almost no choice. So, how do we break out? How do I pull that tube out of your neck? How do I dump you out of that bath of fake news so that you can shake it all off and realize that you are a free and sovereign being with multidimensional capabilities? You have to listen to this program. You have to listen to America Free Radio. Because there are more dimensions than just this one, okay? The first dimension is basically the x-axis. It's just a line, okay? It's a good description of one-dimensional object, just straight line, like a railroad track. The second dimension is a little bit like it, but it's more like a square. It's more like this. You have a surface here. This is two-dimensional, but there's no height to it. The third dimension is the dimension that we live in right now. I mean, you don't see me there because you're looking through a digital camera, so I'm kind of flat. But in reality, I have girth. I have depth. And in the third dimension, we exist in this global syndicate matrix, and we're given a set of goals that every one of us is supposed to be tasked and focused on, and that is to, yes, of course, eat as much as we can, earn as much as we can, fill our garage with toys, and grow old and die, and despair before every payday, and spend everything that you get. That's the global syndicate. That's the masses. Believe it or not, other than this country, where capitalism is allowed to go to its fullest extent, you can actually be successful and become even, a higher level of sovereign than you could ever imagine. But the vast majority of the earth is stuck in this matrix. They don't see any way out. The fourth dimension, of course, is time. It governs the properties of all known matter at any given point, along with three other dimensions known as objects, positions in time. It essentially is plotting its position in the universe on a kind of timeline, right? We have the past, we have the present, and we have the future. I like to think of it a little bit more like a time funnel, where you have, the tube on one side, you have a little wider part of the funnel, and then you have the really potential of all potentialities at the end of that. But still, that's the third dimension, the fourth dimension. Now, according to superstring theory, which has been completely taken apart, its components are legitimate, but the actual theory that everything runs on strings, it's been debunked because of the E8 lattice. We now understand the significance of the Gaussian polytope. We understand the origin of the golden mean, and thus we understand the function and the origin of resonance and creation of energy and matter out of chaos. So the fifth dimension, we would see a world slightly different from our own that would give us a means of measuring the similarity and differences between our world and other possible ones. The fifth dimension, basically, you can see all sides at one time. There is no linearity to time in the fifth dimension. In the fifth dimension, the photon leaves the star and arrives at your eye 8 light years away instantaneously, because at the speed of light, time becomes asymptotic, okay? In other words, distance shrinks to zero because mass becomes infinity. This is, in the sixth dimension, we would see a plane of possible worlds. We call this brain theory, like membrane theory, where universes exist as sort of membranes, and they kind of bump into one another, and space exists between them in varying degrees. So you can kind of jump between universes. In the seventh dimension, you have access to the possible worlds that start with different initial conditions, whereas in the fifth and sixth, the initial conditions are the same and the subsequent actions are different. Here, everything is different from the beginning of time. In the eighth dimension, again, it gives us a plane of such possible universe histories, each of which begins with different initial conditions and branches out infinitely. I like to call these, for lack of a better word, juxtapositions. They're places that we arrive in the universe where we may arrive on one path going in, and then coming out, there's a jumble of paths like a spider web, only in 3 dimensions. Not a flat spider web, but a ball spider web. And we really don't know which exit point to take out of this juxtaposition. We get stuck in it for a while like a rat's nest, running around and round and round, but then we take one and we go out. And because right now we are third dimensional or quasi fourth dimensional beings, we don't really know which one to go out on in advance. But in the eighth dimension, you can see all of these, and you can see which one resonates with your dream, as it were, with your manifestation, with your will, with your desire, and you can go in that direction immediately. This is the beauty of the E8 lattice. In the eighth dimension, these 240 vortices become mathematically visible. And when we break that into 2 fourth dimensional possibilities, that's where the golden mean exists. In my live presentation or in my coaching presentations, which I would love for you to be part of. If you want to know more about this, you can go to my website, brooksagnew.com, and click on the Success Mentoring link. Success Mentoring link. This is not a place where you're going to go to see a bunch of tapes and explanations. What you're going to do is see these events that you can sign up for. They're live events, and they're also going to be very soon some webinar events. And I can teach you the mathematics, the science, and some of these amazing measurements that we have made that can help you know which way to go out of those juxtapositions. So if you're lost and you need a pathfinder, I'm your guy. Okay, this is the difference. This word salad that people stick out there, it's difficult for people to negotiate because they get confused, okay? We hear words like alchemy. We hear words like, greater good and a higher purpose and purpose-driven. It's just word salad. It's just designed to gaslight you, to make you think you don't know anything. And what I'm going to do is break all that apart for you so that you understand what the meaning of the words are, and then you won't be fooled by those that lie in wait to deceive. There are a couple more dimensions. We do have a 9th dimension. We can compare all possible universe histories, starting with all the different laws of physics and initial conditions. And in the 10th and what we think is the final dimension, There are those that talk about an 11th dimension and a 12th dimension. And like I said, in string theory, the possibilities are there, but are they significant? We don't really know. In string theory, you have counterclockwise dimensions going around a single pipe of the frequency, and clockwise dimensions. You have inside and outside dimensions, but you see these become very esoteric. In the standard model, which is a kind of matrix mathematics that we use to put formulas into and functions into to figure out answers that give us a theory of everything. That is to say, something that applies in the quantum world and applies in the macro world. Nothing meaningful has ever come out in putting formulas and ideas and functions in and fudge factors in and constants that have been developed over the years to understand what the 11th and 12th dimensions are. So I'm just telling you that the quantum foam that makes up the universe cannot be explained using string theory. It's obsolete already, because last year the E8 lattice and the Gaussian polytope were resolved. Now, there's not a lot of work done since then. If you actually want to see these things on the screen, you have to come to one of my events. You just do. I mean, there are people out there that are lecturing on it, but they don't understand what it means. They don't understand how significant this is in understanding the power that human consciousness can have in creating the future. So if these extra dimensions are corrupted, or let's just put it another way, if they're compacted instead of expanded, then these extra dimensions become imperceptible and very confusing, and it's easy to be led off in various spiritual directions by various gurus, and I don't want to see that happen to you. You can stand on your own 2 feet in all of these dimensions, and you can hold your own if you know the origin of these things and the truth behind it. Just checking the chat room here to see if there's any other brilliance in here. There's lots. And there are a lot of people in the YouTube chat room, and I appreciate you all for being there. I just only have 2 hours to go through all this stuff. And I want to make sure that as we, embark on the threshold of what we call the theory of everything, because we're driven to it. I mean, physicists, we think about this all the time in theoretical physics, and we haven't really come up with anything solid, but we have come up with things that are very probable. And how do we know it's true? We know it's true because the global syndicate has been using these techniques for a long, long time, for thousands of years. For thousands of years, the whole earth was ruled by one guy. I mean, not one guy for 5,000 years, but one guy at a time led the whole world. It was once said that the sun never set on the British Empire. Why was that? Because their influence was everywhere. Their unified army, their unified theory of everything was everywhere, and anyone who opposed it was immediately crushed. Well, what happened was that they sent their colonists to this country. They did explore, they did cut trees down, they did lay rails, and for a couple hundred years, from the early 1600s to almost the 1800s, they built quite a factory of wealth here. And what was happening is King George was taxing the smack out of it, and we began to resent it. We said, hey, there's an ocean between him and us. Let's declare our independence. Well, that's never worked before. They just send the redcoats over and they crush that country into oblivion. And that's exactly what they tried. And they lost. Against all odds, I would say. Against all odds. They outgunned us. They outmanned us. They were better trained. They were better funded. And yet they lost. Why? Because of the resonance. Because when individuals are able to manifest their own destiny, they become much more powerful. And as they become more powerful, they begin to do what it is they love doing over and over and over again. And as they do that, the resonant energy of what they're doing becomes much more powerful than people who are forced to do what they have to do. So for the first 40 or 50 years of your life, you did everything because you had to. Your whole life was have to. Now you're 40 or 50 years old. Ask yourselves, do I have wealth to manage? Do I have a 401k? Do I have $1 million in the bank? Am I ready to travel now and see the world and do the things I always wanted to do? No, you're not. You need a pathfinder. You need someone who can find your path with you, but from the future. To be able to go to the future and look back and see where you came out. Put your dream out there at the end of the path, and then come back here to the past, which is the present, and see which part of that path lights up, and then follow it. You don't have to go through the woods blind. You can put a beacon out there in the future for yourself. Look, this is America Free Radio. We can do anything we want in here, and we will. My name is Brooks Agnew, and I'm here every Wednesday night from 8 to 10. I just want to say, peace, Earth Explorers. Do your best out there, and don't let anybody tell you you don't have the right to be a free man. See you next week, right here on America Free Radio, on the Revolution Radio Network on freedomslips.com. Be good out there.